I never thought I'd be the guy telling a story like this. You know, the kind of guy whose wife turns out to be cheating, whose life goes to shit over some random text messages. But here I am, sitting with a drink in my hand, trying to make sense of it all and maybe, just maybe, figure out what the hell comes next. It was one of those ordinary evenings, you know? Ella and I had hit that point in our marriage where we were more like roommates than lovers. Nothing dramatic, just a little distant. I figured it was just a phase. Life gets busy, work, bills, routines. I thought we were just going through one of those rough patches people talk about. Then I found the messages. I wasn't snooping. At least, that's what I tell myself. Her phone was lying there, lighting up with notifications, and she was in the shower. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something inside me whispered that I should check. And there they were, dozens of texts, messages between her and some asshole from her office, filled with crap like, "I can't stop thinking about you," and "last night was incredible." My heart dropped right through the floor. My hand started shaking as I scrolled through those words. It was intimate. The kind of stuff she used to say to me years ago, back when things were good. She came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, towel wrapped around her, acting like nothing was wrong. I stood there with her phone in my hand, heart pounding. She froze when she saw the look on my face, and before she could say a word, I threw the phone on the bed. "Who the hell is he?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. At first, she acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. Classic gaslighting. Then, when I wouldn't back down, she started with the excuses. "It only happened once," she said, her voice soft and full of fake regret. "Bullshit," I shot back. "Once? That's all it takes for you to wreck our marriage." She sat on the bed, shoulders slumped, like some damn victim. "I never wanted to hurt you, Caleb," she whispered, like that made any of it better. I stood there, feeling like the walls were closing in. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about our relationship, felt like a lie. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to fight for us. She just sat there, offering half-assed apologies that only made me angrier. When I demanded answers, how long, how often, why? She gave me vague responses, as if sparing me the details would somehow soften the blow. But it didn't. If anything, it made it worse. "You wanted to be honest?" she said finally, folding her arms like she was the one being put on trial. "I needed someone, Caleb. You weren't there for me." That one hit like a punch to the gut. Yeah, maybe I hadn't been the perfect husband, but damn it, I was still here, trying. I didn't check out. I didn't screw around behind her back. After what felt like hours of tense silence, she finally suggested, "Maybe we should try therapy. I don't want to lose everything over this." I was too numb to argue. Therapy? Yeah, sure, why not? Maybe a professional could figure out what the hell went wrong, because I sure as hell couldn't. So I agreed, though every fiber of my being hated the idea of sitting in some stranger's office, airing our dirty laundry. That night, I needed to clear my head, so I met up with Bryce. He'd been through the ringer himself. Divorce, custody battles, the whole nightmare. If anyone could make sense of this mess, it was him. We met at a bar downtown, and the first thing he did when he saw my face was order 2 shots. I must have looked like hell, because he didn't even ask what happened. After downing the shots, I told him everything, the messages, the confrontation, the bullshit excuses. Bryce listened without interrupting, nodding like he'd been there before. "Look, man," he said, leaning in, "I tried to save my marriage, too. Thought if we just went to therapy, we could fix it. But some relationships, they're not worth saving." His words hit hard, planting a seed of doubt that took root immediately. What if he was right? What if Ella and I were already too far gone? We talked for hours, going over everything, from the good memories I had with Ella to the painful reality of what she'd done. Bryce didn't sugarcoat anything. He warned me about what was coming, the late-night arguments, the awkward therapy sessions, the constant second-guessing. "Whatever you do, Caleb," he said, "don't let her make you feel like it's your fault. You didn't cheat. She did." I left that bar with my mind swirling in 100 different directions. I still didn't know if therapy was the answer, but one thing was clear. I couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened. Ella and I spent the next couple of days tiptoeing around each other, avoiding real conversations. It was like we were living in a fragile bubble, waiting for it to pop. Eventually, we found a therapist, Dr. Layla Moore. She seemed competent, professional, the kind of person who could untangle the mess we were in. Our first session with Layla was intense. I laid it all out. How betrayed I felt, how humiliated I was. Ella sat there, looking more annoyed than guilty, as if this whole thing was just an inconvenience for her. I needed emotional support, she said at one point, as if that justified everything. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but Layla intervened before things got out of hand. She had this way of speaking, calm, measured, but direct. It was unsettling, like she could see right through us. I didn't want to be there, but I couldn't deny that Layla's presence made the room feel different. Maybe it was the way she listened, or the way her gaze lingered a second too long. Whatever it was, I noticed. When the session ended, Ella suggested we grab dinner together. "We need to try, Caleb," she said, giving me this hopeful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I agreed, but my heart wasn't in it. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if we could ever get back to the way things used to be. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, listening to her steady breathing, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. And deep down, I wasn't sure I even wanted to fix things. The bubble had popped. Now I just had to figure out what came next. The first session with Dr. Layla Moore was every bit as awkward and draining as I expected. I sat stiffly on the couch, Ella beside me, with just enough space between us to make it obvious that things were broken. It felt like we were two strangers forced into the same room to patch up a life that neither of us knew how to fix anymore. Layla sat across from us, legs crossed, a notebook balanced on her knee. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with this sharp intelligence in her eyes. The kind of look that made you feel like she could see straight through your bullshit, whether you were ready to admit it or not. "So, Caleb," she began, her voice smooth and steady, "why don't you start? Tell me how you've been feeling about everything." I took a breath, already regretting my decision to come. "How I've been feeling?" I repeated, running a hand over my face. "I feel humiliated, betrayed, like the person I trusted the most decided I wasn't enough." My voice wavered, and I hated how raw it sounded. But I pressed on. "She lied to me. For months, apparently. I found out through her phone, not from her. What the hell am I supposed to do with that?" I could feel Ella shift beside me, like she was gearing up for her defense. Sure enough, she jumped in. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Caleb." You didn't mean for it to happen?" I cut her off, my anger bubbling to the surface. "What? You just tripped and fell into his bed?" Ella sighed dramatically, like I was the one being unreasonable. "I needed someone, okay? You've been distant for months, maybe years. I was alone, even when we were together. And screwing someone else was the solution?" I shot back. "Brilliant." Layla raised her hand slightly, signaling us to pause. "I know this is painful for both of you, but we need to keep this conversation constructive." She glanced at Ella, then back at me. "Let's try to understand each other's perspectives." "Ella, you mentioned feeling emotionally unsupported. Caleb, how does that sit with you?" I clenched my jaw, trying not to explode. I work my ass off to provide for us, and she tells me I wasn't emotionally available. It's a slap in the face. I didn't cheat. I didn't throw away our marriage. She did. Ella exhaled sharply, folding her arms. "You don't get it. You never listened to me, Caleb. You never have." Layla stepped in again, her voice calm but firm. "Ella, let's try to avoid placing all the blame. I can see that both of you are in a lot of pain right now." "Pain?" I wanted to laugh. Ella was sitting there like some wounded saint, pretending that she hadn't detonated a bomb in my life. And Layla, well, she was good at what she did. I had to give her that. She had this way of making you feel heard, even if you didn't want to talk. As much as I hated being there, I found myself watching Layla closely. She had this quiet confidence, this aura of control. The way her eyes met mine, it felt like she could read every thought I was trying to suppress. There was something magnetic about her, and it caught me off guard. It wasn't just that she was attractive, though she was. It was the way she seemed to understand me, even in that first session. When we left the office, Ella was in full damage control mode. "We're doing the right thing," she said, squeezing my arm like that would somehow make everything better. I just gave her a grunt in return, my mind still tangled in frustration and resentment. The second session came quicker than I expected. I walked into Layla's office with the same anger, but this time, something felt different. Maybe it was because Ella was already on edge, probably expecting another grilling. Or maybe it was Layla. As the session went on, I noticed that Layla seemed to engage with me more directly. She asked me questions that Ella never thought to ask, about my frustrations, my hopes, even my regrets. It felt oddly refreshing, like someone finally saw me instead of the failures I apparently represented to Ella. At one point, I told Layla about my friendship with Bryce and how his divorce left him bitter. He told me some relationships aren't worth saving, I admitted. And honestly, I don't know if I disagree with him. Ella glared at me like I just slapped her, but Layla gave me this thoughtful nod, as if she understood exactly where I was coming from. It's normal to feel conflicted, she said. You've been deeply hurt. The question now is, do you believe this relationship can still bring you happiness? It was a good question, one I didn't have an answer to. After the session, something strange happened. Ella, in her usual careless way, left her phone on Layla's desk. She realized it halfway down the hall and went back to grab it. But not before I did. I know it was wrong, but screw it. I was already knee-deep in betrayal. What was one more breach of trust? I unlocked her phone with the same pin she's used for years and scrolled through her messages again. And there it was. More proof. Messages with that same coworker, dating back months. Way longer than she'd originally admitted. I can't wait to see you again, one message read. Wish I was waking up next to you, said another. The rage that flooded through me was immediate and overwhelming. This wasn't some one-time mistake. This was a full-blown affair with emotions, with plans. She had been living a double life, lying to my face every single day. When Ella returned to grab her phone, I handed it to her without a word. She didn't even realize I'd seen everything. But the knowledge burned inside me, eating away at whatever scraps of trust one had left. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to process, to figure out my next move. Therapy was already a joke, but now I knew for certain that Ella's attempts to fix things were just another performance. That night, lying next to her in bed, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how the hell I ended up here, with a wife I couldn't trust, in a marriage that felt more like a trap. But there was one small sliver of light in all of it. Layla. Somehow, talking to her made the anger a little more bearable. She wasn't just another therapist giving me generic advice. She saw me, and that was dangerous. Because in a room filled with lies, Layla's attention felt like the only thing real. Over the next few sessions, something shifted between Layla and me. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just a glance that lingered a bit too long, a smile that felt a little too warm. But it was there, growing in the quiet moments, in the way her questions started to feel less like therapy and more like genuine curiosity. She didn't just ask about my frustrations with Ella. She asked about me, what I wanted, what made me feel alive, what scared me. And God help me, it felt good. For the first time in what felt like years, someone was truly paying attention to me. Not out of obligation, not because we were married or because she had to, just because she wanted to. Every time I left her office, I felt lighter, like I had shed some of the anger that had been weighing me down. But that relief only lasted until I got home. Ella, of course, noticed the change. She wasn't stupid. I was pulling away, and she knew it. One night, she tried to set up a romantic evening. Candles, wine, even some lingerie I hadn't seen in years. She hovered around the kitchen while I drank my whiskey, giving me that look, the one that used to drive me crazy. Let's try, she whispered, running her hand over my arm. I miss us, Kayla. Her voice was soft, seductive, like she was trying to conjure some old magic between us. But it was gone. Whatever spark we'd had was buried under the lies and betrayal. She could have been anyone standing there, and it wouldn't have made a difference. I went through the motions that night, but it was mechanical, like checking off a box. Even while she kissed me, all I could think about was Layla. Her voice, her questions, her eyes that seemed to strip away every lie I told myself. It was unfair, I know that. But fairness stopped matching the moment Ella decided to sleep with someone else. It wasn't long after that Layla suggested we grab coffee after one of our sessions. She brought it up casually like it was no big deal. "I know a place down the street," she said, smiling in that disarming way she did. "Just coffee if you got the time." I hesitated. I knew it wasn't just coffee. Not really. But the thought of sitting across from her outside the office, away from the suffocating weight of my marriage, it was too tempting to resist. So I agreed. The coffee shop was small, tucked into a corner of a quiet street. It felt intimate without trying, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones, as if the walls were holding their secrets. Layla and I found a table near the window, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I could breathe. We talked for what felt like hours. Not about therapy or Ella, just life. Relationships. How people sometimes stay in marriages long after the love is gone, because it's easier than starting over. People get comfortable, Layla said, stirring her coffee. They think routine is love, but comfort isn't happiness. Her words hit home, and I found myself nodding before I even realized it. "Yeah," I murmured. "You stay because you think it'll get better eventually. But it doesn't. It just drags on." Her hand brushed mine as she reached for her cup, and that small touch sent a spark through me, lighting up every nerve. I knew, in that moment, that something was shifting between us, something we couldn't take back. When she smiled, it wasn't the polite smile of a therapist. It was different, softer, more personal. And I knew I was in trouble. At home, Ella could sense that I was slipping further away. She kept trying little gestures, forced smiles, asking if I wanted to watch our old favorite shows together. But everything felt hollow. I was there physically, but emotionally, I was miles away. I didn't even try to hide it. One night she finally snapped. "Where are you, Caleb?" she demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "You're here, but you're not really here. What the hell is going on?" I shrugged, not even bothering to give her a real answer. "Maybe I just need some space." "Space?" she repeated, her eyes narrowing. "Jesus Christ, Caleb. You think I'm the only one who screwed up? You checked out completely. You think I don't notice?" I didn't respond. What was the point? She was right, but I wasn't about to admit that. Not to her. The next day, I met Bryce for drinks. He could tell right away that something was up. "You're in deep, aren't you?" he said, raising an eyebrow. I didn't even bother pretending. "It's not like that," I muttered. "We're just talking. She gets me." Bryce snorted, shaking his head. "You're playing with fire, man. Getting involved with a therapist? It's her job to make you feel important. That's the whole point. She listens because she has to." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. But it didn't matter. I was already too far gone. "Be careful," Bryce warned. "This won't end the way you think it will." I nodded, but his words slid off me like water. He didn't understand. Layla wasn't just another therapist doing her job. She was different. At least that's what I told myself. By the time I saw Layla again, the line between professional and personal had already blurred. Her touch still lingered on my hand, and every conversation felt like a lifeline pulling me further from the wreckage of my marriage. And deep down, I knew I didn't want to stop. It started in one of those sessions where everything felt too close, too real. I don't know what exactly tipped it over the edge. Maybe the way Layla looked at me that day, like she was reading every thought I tried to bury, or maybe it was the silence between her questions that felt more intimate than words ever could. We were sitting there, as usual, but something shifted. I saw it in her eyes first. A flicker of hesitation, maybe fear, before she closed her notebook and placed it carefully on the table. "I have to tell you something," Layla said, her voice quieter than usual. "This isn't easy for me." She folded her hands in her lap, exhaling slowly. "I know I'm supposed to keep things professional, but I can't pretend anymore." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Pretend what?" Her gaze locked with mine, and for a second, the air between us felt like it could snap. "I'm attracted to you, Caleb," she confessed. "And I know I shouldn't be saying this, but I needed you to know. You can't tell anyone, not even Ella." The room went dead silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat. I knew this was a line we weren't supposed to cross, but hearing those words from her lips felt like validation, like I hadn't imagined the way things were shifting between us. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Because you're real," she whispered. "Because I see you, Caleb, and I don't think anyone else really does." I knew it was dangerous. I knew it could blow up in my face in ways I couldn't even imagine. But in that moment, I didn't care. I needed her like a drowning man needs air. I needed to feel wanted again. What started as subtle glances and lingering touches escalated quickly. It didn't take long before we stopped pretending altogether. After one session, instead of heading home, we ended up at her apartment. Her place was small but cozy. Candles on the coffee table, soft music playing from a speaker in the corner. I barely noticed any of it. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, it was like we were released from whatever restraints we'd been holding on to. She kissed me first, tentative at first, then urgent, like she'd been waiting for this just as long as I had. And before I could second-guess anything, we were in her bedroom, pulling at each other's clothes like we were starving. It was messy, reckless, everything it shouldn't have been, but in the chaos of it all, I felt alive for the first time in months. When it was over, we lay there in the dark, her head resting on my chest, our breathing slowing in unison. I felt relief wash over me, a strange, twisted sense of satisfaction. This was more than just sex. This was revenge. And God, it felt good. For the first time since I found those messages on Ella's phone, I didn't feel powerless. I had taken something back, even if it was wrong. And beyond the revenge, there was a deep sense of comfort with Layla, a connection that went beyond words. With her, I didn't have to pretend. I could just exist, and that was enough. After that first night, it became a routine. We would meet after work, at her apartment, finding solace in each other's arms. Every touch, every kiss, felt like an escape from the weight of my failing marriage. With Layla, I wasn't just Caleb the husband or Caleb the victim. I was something else, something free. At home, I began testing the waters with Ella, dropping hints about my new friend, and watching closely for any sign of jealousy. Layla suggested that I'd say casually during dinner, watching her face for the slightest flicker of discomfort. But Ella didn't take the bait. If she suspected anything, she kept it buried deep. She played the same detached game she'd always played, and it only fueled my resentment. I hated how little she seemed to care. Even after everything that happened, after she'd admitted to cheating, she still wore that mask of indifference. One night, as we lay in bed, Ella turned to me and said, "I feel like you're hiding something." I smiled in the dark, a smile she couldn't see. "What makes you think that?" She let out a frustrated sigh, but didn't push further. She knew how to play her cards close, but so did I. Meanwhile, Layla was growing more attached by the day. What had started as an escape for both of us was quickly becoming something more for her. "Why are you still with Ella?" she asked one night, tracing circles on my chest with her fingertip. "It's complicated," I muttered, knowing it was a weak answer. "It doesn't have to be," Layla whispered. "You deserve to be happy, Caleb. You deserve someone who really sees you, who loves you the way you need to be loved." The way she looked at me in that moment, with such raw emotion, made my heart ache. But it also terrified me. This wasn't just some casual fling anymore. Layla wanted more, and I wasn't sure I could give it to her. "You could leave her," Layla said softly, almost as if the words were a secret. "We could be together, really together." For a moment, I let myself imagine it. A life with Layla, free from the weight of my broken marriage. But the fantasy was fleeting, quickly drowned out by the reality of what that would mean. It was one thing to cheat. It was another thing entirely to blow up my life for someone else. "I need time," I told her, dodging the question as best I could. Layla smiled, but I could see the disappointment flicker in her eyes. "Just promise me you'll think about it," she whispered, pressing a kiss to my lips. I nodded, even though I knew deep down that things were spiraling out of control. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was something bigger, messier, and far more dangerous than I had ever planned for. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but at that point, I didn't care. The thrill of my affair with Layla was intoxicating, dangerous, reckless, and addictive. Every moment with her felt like reclaiming a part of myself that Ella had trampled. But beneath it all, I knew the walls were closing in. Sooner or later, something was going to break. It happened during one of our sessions. I don't know why I did it, but something inside me wanted to push Ella to see if she would finally react. I started talking about new beginnings and finding someone who really understands me. My words were deliberate, sharp in their vagueness. I knew Ella would catch on. I wanted her to catch on. Ella's head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. What's that supposed to mean, Caleb? Layla shifted uncomfortably in her chair, shooting me a warning glance, but I ignored her. I kept going, pouring gasoline on the fire. Sometimes it's not about fixing things, I said slowly. Sometimes it's about realizing when it's time to move on. Ella crossed her arms, her expression cold. And you think you found someone who understands you? I gave her a small, knowing smile. Maybe. Layla cleared her throat, clearly desperate to steer the session back on course. We're here to focus on your relationship with Ella, Caleb. Let's try to keep the conversation productive. But it was too late. Ella's suspicion was lit, and I knew that fire wouldn't burn out easily. She didn't say much for the rest of the session, but I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat. She was going to figure it out. It was only a matter of time. A few days later, Layla called me, her voice tight with panic. Ella scheduled an individual session with me, she said. She asked for it out of the blue. I think she knows Caleb. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What did you tell her? I had to agree, Layla whispered. I couldn't say no without raising suspicion. But if she starts digging, if she pushes me, she trailed off, and I could hear the fear in her voice. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about her career, her reputation. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. Caleb, you can't say anything, she begged. You have to promise me. If Ella asks, you have to deny everything. Please. The desperation in her voice caught me off guard. Layla had always been so composed, so in control, but now she sounded terrified, like someone clinging to the edge of a cliff, afraid of the fall. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. I won't say anything, I muttered. You promise? She whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I promise, I said, though the words felt heavy on my tongue. But I knew, deep down, that promises wouldn't matter for much longer. Ella was too smart to be thrown off the scent. And once she figured out the truth, all hell was going to break loose. It didn't take long for everything to come crashing down. The tension between Ella, Layla, and me had been building for weeks, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the dam broke. I could see it in Ella's eyes during every session. The way she studied Layla and me, piecing together the unspoken truths between us. And then it happened. We were in the middle of another session when Ella leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. You're sleeping with him, aren't you? The room went dead silent. Layla's face drained of color, her composure faltering for the first time. What? She stammered, trying to maintain control, but the panic was written all over her face. Ella's eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. Don't play dumb, Layla. I'm not an idiot. I've seen the way you look at him. Layla opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off before she could dig herself deeper. Yes, I said coldly, my voice flat and emotionless. We're sleeping together. The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. Ella's breath caught, and for a moment, she just stared at me, her composure cracking under the weight of my confession. I could see the shock, the betrayal, the realization all washing over her at once. This was the moment she had feared, the moment she probably knew was coming but refused to accept. You son of a bitch, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. I didn't flinch. I sat there, stone-faced, watching as the carefully constructed walls around her crumbled. This was what she had done to me, broken me, shattered my trust, and now I was handing it right back to her. Ella's anger erupted like a volcano, her voice rising as she stood from the couch. You want to ruin everything because I made a mistake? You think this makes us even? She was pacing now, hands running through her hair in frustration. This is worse. You dragged our therapist into this, Caleb. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? She wasn't wrong, but I was too far gone to care. I had wanted revenge, and I got it. Watching her unravel, seeing her realize that her infidelity had triggered something even more destructive. It should have felt like justice. But it didn't. Layla sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap, panic written across her face. She knew the fallout was coming, and there was no way to stop it. Her career, her reputation, everything she had built was now hanging by a thread. Ella's voice cracked with fury and desperation. "You're disgusting, both of you." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. "We're done. Don't you dare come back home tonight, Caleb." She slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing through the room. I sat there in the aftermath, staring at the spot where she had stood. Layla stayed silent, tears welling in her eyes. "I need to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without another word, she stood and left the room, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my own making. Ella and I never went back to therapy after that. The marriage dissolved quickly. Papers filed, belongings packed, phone calls reduced to logistical arrangements. There was no attempt at reconciliation, no closure, no final conversation to wrap everything up neatly. It just ended, like a dying fire that no one bothered to put out. At first I felt vindicated. I had taken back some measure of power, made her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. But that satisfaction didn't last. My relationship with Layla fizzled out, just as I knew it would. The passion that had once burned so brightly between us was gone, replaced by awkward silences and unmet expectations. She wanted more, a real relationship, a future. But all I had to offer was the broken pieces of myself, and that wasn't enough for either of us. In the end, Layla was just an escape, a temporary fix for a deeper wound that she could never heal. When she finally walked away, I didn't fight her. I let her go, knowing it was the right thing to do. Now, I'm sitting in the quiet aftermath of it all, trying to make sense of the choices I made. The revenge felt good for a moment, but it came at a cost, one I didn't fully understand until it was too late. Ella's betrayal broke me, but my own actions shattered any chance of healing. I could have walked away with some semblance of dignity, but instead, I burned everything to the ground. And now, I'm alone. I sit in the silence of my empty apartment, staring at the walls, replaying every moment in my mind. The arguments, the betrayals, the fleeting passion with Layla. It's all a blur of mistakes and missed opportunities. Maybe I thought revenge would bring me closure, but it didn't. It just left me hollow, with nothing to show for it but a pile of regrets. I know I need to figure out what comes next, but the truth is I don't have a clue. Starting over feels impossible, like trying to build a new life on the ruins of the old one. But maybe that's the only choice I have left. All I know is that this isn't the life I wanted. And now, it's up to me to figure out what the hell to do with it.